Friends, let me ask you a question. Picture this scene. It is January 2026. A plane lands in the biting cold of Beijing. Walking down the stairs is not Justin Trudeau, with his colorful socks and rehearsed political correctness. No, the man stepping onto the tarmac is Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. If that name sounds unfamiliar, you need to remember just one identity. He is the ultimate globalist financial technocrat. Former Governor of the Bank of Canada, former Governor of the Bank of England, a man considered one of us by Wall Street and the City of London. By all logic, a man like this should be the United States' favorite obedient child, a core operator of the Western capitalist order. But today, this son of Wall Street is standing in Beijing, seeking China's strategic protection. Why? Because his neighbor, that superpower which calls itself an ally, is no longer satisfied with just shearing the Canadian sheep. They are preparing to take the sheep, the pen, and the land underneath it. Today, we are cutting through the diplomatic fog. We are going to use a scalpel to dissect the bloody truth hidden under the guise of trade diversification. The reality is this: Canada is facing a substantive threat of annexation by the United States. And Carney's visit to China? This is the last card, and the most dangerous card, Canada has left to play to avoid becoming the 51st state. To understand this, we have to go back to the source, the man who returned to Washington. Do not look at the current situation with the eyes of a few years ago. In 2025, when Donald Trump returned to the White House, he didn't bring a desire for renegotiation to Ottawa. He brought a mindset of asset liquidation. In his logic, Canada is not an equal sovereign nation. It is a distressed asset, geographically prime, resource-rich, but poorly managed, waiting to be acquired by the United States. You think the 51st state talk is just a joke? Throughout most of 2025, the White House's attitude toward Canada can only be described as bullying. And I don't use that word emotionally, I use it factually. Starting in February 2025, the U.S. slapped a blanket 25% tariff on Canada. In specific sectors like pharmaceuticals and furniture, that number hit 100%. For a country that sends 76% of its exports to the U.S., this wasn't just a sanction, it was an economic massacre. But that is not the terrifying part. The terrifying part is a document called the Golden Dome Missile Defense Proposal. Trump threw the bill directly onto Canada's table. The terms? Either you pay a $61 billion protection fee to join this system, or you simply merge into the United States, become the 51st state, and enjoy the protection for free. Listen to that tone. That is not a defense consultation between allies. That is a mob boss collecting protection money. That is a real estate developer forcing a demolition. In the eyes of certain strategists in the White House, with the Arctic ice melting, Canada's Northwest Passage and Arctic resources have become core interests of the United States. They do not want to see an independent government haggling with them in their own strategic backyard. They want direct jurisdiction. They want Canada's water, minerals, and energy to become domestic U.S. reserves. This is the real background of Trudeau's downfall. Trudeau thought shared values could handle the United States. When faced with this naked predation, his worldview collapsed. The Canadian economy ground to a halt in 2025 under U.S. tariffs. Public anger boiled over. The Liberal Party, to save itself, had to swap in Mark Carney. Carney is a smart man. As a top-tier elite who has played the financial game his whole life, he knows better than anyone. Talking feelings with the current U.S. administration is a dead end. Talking rules is playing the piano to a cow. The U.S. is now practicing Donloism, a mutant strain of the Monroe Doctrine. It means the Americas are America's backyard, and every blade of grass in the backyard belongs to me. So, I ask you, facing a neighbor who wants to eat you alive, what do? Beg for mercy? Useless. The weaker you are, the bigger their appetite gets. Fight back? Canada's military power couldn't even hold off the U.S. National Guard. There is only one way. You must make yourself indigestible. Or, to put it more bluntly, you find a bodyguard your neighbor is afraid of, and you bury nails in your own house that your neighbor dares not step on. This is the entire logic behind Carney's visit to Beijing. Listen closely, because this is the crucial part. This trip isn't about selling a bit more canola oil or a few more lobsters. If it were just for trade figures, Carney wouldn't risk a total rupture with Washington. What Carney really wants is to introduce a powerful external force into the northern part of the North American continent. He wants to drive a wedge so deep that when the U.S. tries to annex Canada, they are forced to calculate an unbearable geopolitical cost. This is called the poison pill strategy. Think about it. If Canada's critical mineral supply chain has deep Chinese participation, if Canada's electric vehicle industry adopts Chinese technical standards, if Canada's port infrastructure is tied to long-term operating contracts with Chinese enterprises, then, when the U.S. tries to force a merger through economic suffocation, they aren't just squeezing a weak Ottawa, they are directly colliding with the strategic interests of the world's second-largest economy. This is walking a tightrope over a cliff. But in Carney's calculation, this is likely the only option left to keep Canada on the map as a sovereign country. Let's look at the cards in Carney's hand. First, energy and critical minerals. This is the fat meat the U.S. covets most, and it is Canada's biggest chip. In the past, the U.S. logic was simple. Canada's mines are American mines. You must supply us 100%, and you cannot let China touch them. But now, facing the tariff stick, the Carney administration is signaling a new reality. If the U.S. won't buy, or wants to take it for free, Canada has other buyers. Beijing's demand for lithium, cobalt, and nickel is infinite. Carney is gambling. He is betting that the U.S. won't actually launch a military invasion just because Canada sells rocks to China. He is betting that Wall Street capitalists, terrified of China cornering the resource market, will force the White House to loosen the noose around Canada's neck. Second, the reconstruction of manufacturing. The U.S. tariffs on Canadian auto parts and vehicles are effectively destroying the North American automotive supply chain. The U.S. wants manufacturing to flow back to the mainland, leaving Canada as a hole in the ground for resource extraction. Carney's counterattack is sharp. Since you won't let me participate in your supply chain, I will build a new standard on this continent. Introducing China's electric vehicle industrial chain, utilizing China's absolute advantage in battery technology and cost control, making Canada the production base for high-cost performance products in the North American market. This isn't just to save Canadian auto workers. It is to prevent Canada's industrial structure from hollowing out completely, to stop it from becoming a giant Alaska. There is a third, hidden but critical point: financial security. As a former central banker, Carney knows the risk of relying on a single dollar system. During the trade war of 2025, the U.S. frequently threatened to exclude Canadian financial institutions from certain dollar settlement channels or used long-arm jurisdiction to sanction Canadian companies. While de-dollarization in North America sounds like a fantasy, Carney strengthening financial settlement cooperation with China and exploring the use of RMB in bilateral trade is essentially building a backup generator for the Canadian economy. If the U.S. cuts the power line, Canada can at least maintain basic vital signs. Of course, to American eyes, this is naked betrayal. While Carney is in the air flying to Beijing, the reaction in Washington is hysterical. U.S. media is already hyping the narrative that Canada is becoming China's Trojan horse. Senators are screaming for a total blockade of the northern border. But we must see the absurdity of this logic. Who tore up the spirit of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement first? The United States. Who used the tariff stick to back Canada into a corner? The United States. Who issued the threat of annexation? The United States. Canada's resistance is a survival instinct. For China, let's be objective. This is a massive geopolitical opportunity, but it is filled with risks. Accepting Carney's overture means stepping directly into the bedroom of the American empire. This is not just a trade calculation, it is a probe of the boundaries of the great power game. Beijing knows very well Carney is not pro-China. He is a realist with no way out. He is smiling now because there is a gun pointed at the back of his head. Once the pressure from the U.S. eases, or if the U.S. presidency changes, Canada could jump back at any moment. However, as long as the U.S. maintains this winner-takes-all hegemonic mindset, this centrifugal force driving Canada away will persist. There is another fascinating detail about Carney's visit. He deliberately avoided the traditional human rights diplomacy routine. In the past, whenever Trudeau visited China, he loved to pull little stunts at dinner parties, mentioning so-called universal values, which always ended with both sides unhappy. But Carney? This financier, even facing huge public opinion pressure at home, has maintained astonishing professionalism. Before leaving, he hinted that this trip is about survival, not ideological preaching. He knows that the Canada of today has no qualification to posture in front of its creditor and lifeguard. This exposes the fragility of the West's so-called alliance of values. When the economic cake is big enough, or the survival crisis is urgent enough, those pretty slogans become worthless in an instant. The U.S. can sacrifice Canada for America first, and Canada can partner with America's biggest rival for survival. This is the cold truth of international politics. Let's go one layer deeper. Can Carney's strategy actually work? In the short term, yes, it puts pressure on the U.S. Trump might be arrogant, but he is a businessman. If he realizes that pushing Canada too hard will result in a total tilt toward the east, creating a strategic gap on the U.S. northern border, he might loosen his grip slightly. He might offer a discount on that protection fee. But in the long term, Canada's situation remains tragic. You cannot change geopolitical destiny. They are too far from God and too close to the United States. Carney bringing in Chinese power is a tactical diversion, but it cannot change the balance of power on the North American continent. If the U.S. truly decides to crush Canada at any cost, Beijing is too far away to stop it. So, Carney's operation is dancing on the blade of a knife. He has to calibrate it perfectly, make the U.S. feel the pain, feel the fear of losing their strategic buffer, but not make the U.S. feel so desperate that they flip the table and use force. This is why, while emphasizing diversification, Carney still carefully declares that Canada is America's staunch ally. This schizophrenic posture is the true reality of a weak nation surviving in the cracks between great powers. For us watching this drama, do not just stare at the surface level of warming China-Canada relations. You need to see the significant signal of American hegemonic decline. It can no longer maintain the loyalty of its alliance system by providing public goods like security, markets, and prosperity. It can only rely on intimidation, extortion, and plunder. When a little brother starts looking for outsiders to help because he is afraid his big brother will eat him, the big brother's status in the underworld has already begun to disintegrate from within. Buying Greenland might have been a joke, but the threat of Canada, the 51st state, has fundamentally shifted Ottawa's strategic baseline. Carney's trip to Beijing might not immediately produce earth-shattering contracts or rewrite global trade patterns overnight. But it is a marker in history. It marks that the cracks in the North American unipolar system are now too large to cover up. That U.S.-Canada intimacy, once seen as a solid block of iron, has been crushed into powder by the wheels of America First. When Carney shakes hands in Beijing, the politicians in Washington should feel a chill down their spines, not because of what China did, but because they themselves forced their closest neighbor to become a dangerous variable. This is the truth about the backstab. Canada did not stab the U.S. in the back. The U.S. stabbed Canada first, and Canada turned around and picked up the only shield available on the ground. In the days to come, we will see more games like this. Canada will not be the last. When a hegemon starts devouring its own allies to replenish its blood, defection and fence-sitting by allies will become the new normal. And we? We just need to watch quietly. Watch how this North American family drama turns into a geopolitical thriller. Carney has taken this step. Regardless of the ending, history will remember. In the winter of 2026, Canada tried for the first time not to be America's shadow, but a country struggling for its own existence. This is reality. Next, we will closely watch Washington's specific retaliation after Carney returns. Will it be more taxes, sanctions, or even crazier political pressure? The show has just begun. If you found today's analysis valuable, smash that like button and subscribe. Share this with friends who want to understand the real mechanics of the world. The gap in cognition is the gap in wealth. I'll see you in the next video.